Imagine Rome. 114 years before Christ. The sun had not yet risen high. Long shadows from the temples fell on the stone pavement, still wet from the night dew. The forum was almost empty, but the silence was already broken by the rhythmic blows of hammers. Wooden beams creaked as workers built a frame over a deep pit. Its edges were even, and the walls were smooth, as if carved from stone. In a few hours, a woman would be lowered into it, and they would cover her with earth while she was still breathing. This would not be the execution of a thief or a rebel. Her crime was breaking her vow of chastity. She was a Vestal Virgin, a priestess who had sworn to keep the sacred fire of the goddess Vesta burning for 30 years, and remain a virgin. Her name was Cornelia, and many, even among those who had come to watch the execution, believed she was innocent. Vestal Virgins occupied a special place in Roman society. They had privileges unavailable to other women. They could own property, make wills, ride in chariots accompanied by lictors, and sit in places of honor at games. But they received all this in exchange for an oath. Violating it meant disgrace, not only for the priestess herself, but also, according to belief, a threat of Vesta's wrath upon all of Rome. Such a crime was considered a religious catastrophe. Killing a Vestal Virgin directly was sacrilege. So another punishment was devised, burying her alive in a special underground chamber, with a tiny supply of bread and water. A formal preservation of life that actually meant a slow death in darkness. To understand how she ended up here, we must return to her childhood, a time when there were no temple walls, no sacred fire, and no burden of vows. It was then that the traits which would determine her fate were formed. Cornelia joined the College of Vestal Virgins as a child. Her father, wealthy, but not of the highest nobility, saw this as an honor, an elevation for his family. Being chosen meant breaking free from the confines of a woman's traditional life. Marriage, housework, children, service to Vesta guaranteed status, and inviolability, but at the same time, it took away her right to a family, to love, and to any personal freedom. Cornelia did not know this. She was 6 years old, and the world seemed big and safe. She did not understand that her life had already been decided. Without her, that morning the house was filled with a silence unlike any other. Servants moved slowly, carefully rearranging the dishes, stepping so as not to creak the floor. Her father was gone. He had left before sunrise, perhaps to avoid the scene. Her mother stood by the door, motionless, her face frozen, like marble, a hand on her daughter's shoulder, and for a moment Cornelia thought it was a sign of support. But there was something else in that touch, something cold. Final. Farewell. Before them stood a woman in white, stern, impenetrable, the high priestess of the Temple of Vesta. Her gaze swept over the child, as if she were no longer a person, but an object, to be delivered to a specific place. Everything had been decided. All that remained was to perform the ritual. In Rome, this was considered an honor, but behind this beautiful facade lay institutionalized sacrifice. Vestal Virgins were girls from patrician families, aged 6 to 10, chosen to serve the goddess Vesta for 30 years. The first 10 years were spent in training, the next 10 serving at the altar, the last 10 passing on their knowledge to younger girls. During this entire time, they were bound by a vow of chastity. Even the slightest suspicion of breaking this vow was considered a religious catastrophe. The punishment was special. The law forbade the shedding of a Vestal Virgin's blood, so she was buried alive in an underground chamber, with a small supply of food and water. It was a legal fiction that allowed death to be called purification. But in reality, it was slow suffocation. In the dark, Cornelia did not know this. She was not asked if she wanted this life. Her mother just leaned over and whispered, "You must be strong." The Temple of Vesta stood like a separate world within Rome, a white rotunda with columns, stone floors, and in the center, a sacred fire that was never to be extinguished. The Romans believed that the fate of the city burned with it. Guarding it was the highest honor and the greatest burden. The high priestess explained nothing. She simply walked through the narrow passageways, and the girl followed silently. The smell of smoke from the fire mingled with the coolness of the stone. Each step echoed off the walls. Other women in white robes were waiting in the courtyard. They stood motionless, like statues, and looked at the newcomer, as if trying to imagine how to make her part of this flawless mechanism. Not a child, not a person, but a servant of the cult. One of the older priestesses raised her hand, a wrinkled palm, dry and warm at the same time. It was a sign. Cornelia trembled, but held out her small hand. When their hands touched, the formality was complete. The oath was accepted. There was no turning back. Somewhere behind her, the fire crackled again, and this time, it seemed alive to her, watching her, waiting for her to become part of it. Her hair was cut. Without a word or explanation, the scissors closed with a dry metallic sound, and dark strands fell onto her shoulders, sliding down like something lost forever. She pressed her lips together to keep from making a sound. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she managed to swallow them. The priestess, holding the scissors, gathered the cut hair in her hands and threw it into a bowl of ashes. The hair mixed with the gray flakes left over from previous victims of this ritual. It was an act that was both sacred and humiliating. Now Cornelia no longer belonged to herself, no longer belonged to her family, no longer even belonged to the world. She belonged to the temple. The first days passed as if in a thick fog. She was taught not to ask questions. She was taught to keep her head slightly bowed, to look at the floor, to breathe quietly, so as not to attract attention. Her body had to learn to sit with a straight back for hours on end, until her legs went numb and her shoulders cramped. At night, when the others fell asleep, she lay motionless and cried, burying her face in her pillow. After a few weeks, she learned to do this silently, because even the walls of the temple had ears. Once, an old priestess with a face that had long forgotten softness came up to her. Her voice was even and cold. "You are no longer a girl. You are fire. If you go out, the city will perish." Cornelia did not understand the meaning, but the tone left no room for questions. Sometimes, it seemed to her that the sacred fire was really alive. It watched. It waited for her to make a mistake. She remembered her mother, her voice, her warm hands, the smell of home. There had been a fire there too. But it was different. A domestic fire. Gentle. Not like this one. Cold in its eternity. Merciless and hungry. Years passed. Cornelia grew up. Her posture straight. Her gaze restrained and heavy. She was like all the other Vestal Virgins. A sister among sisters. Without a name. Without a past. She knew every sound of this place. The crackling of wood. The rustling of sandals on stone. The echo of footsteps in the columned hall. But Rome was changing. The year 114 BC was a time of tension. The Senate was torn by disputes. Rumors spread through the city. Even religion became a weapon of politics. One evening, Cornelia was standing on guard by the fire. An unexplained anxiety weighed on her chest. She went into the garden, an enclosed space behind the temple walls. A man stood between the columns. Young, dark-haired, dressed simply. But not a slave, not a priest. Someone from outside. Their eyes met, and she did not look away, not because she wanted something forbidden, but because for the first time in many years, someone looked at her. As a person. It lasted only seconds. Then he disappeared into the shadows. She returned to the fire, and for the first time, it seemed colder. The accusation came suddenly, like a stone into still water. Officially, one of the servants claimed to have seen Cornelia break her vow. Some said it was a young scribe. Others. Several slaves forced to repeat the same story. From that moment, life in the temple changed. Social isolation here was more cruel than any official punishment. Cornelia stopped hearing her name. She was told, "Take this. Put that there." No personal address. When she entered the hall, conversations stopped. The fire burned. But her shifts were never alone now. Always someone nearby. Not to help, but to watch. She noticed older priestesses whispering in corners. Men in red cloaks, pontiffs visiting twice a day. They never spoke to her, but their glances were too long to be accidental. She knew the stories of others. Some accused simply for being seen with a relative. Others, blamed for famine, called a sign of the goddess's wrath. Here, no proof was needed. Interpretation was enough. And now she understood. She had become another story, to be whispered for years. The next day, she was summoned to the hearing room. Two pontiffs waited. One gray-haired, deep wrinkles, spoke softly, but every word was a trap. The other, younger, sharp features, looked as if the verdict was already decided. "Cornelia," said the elder, "you understand that the purity of a Vestal Virgin is the guarantee of peace for all Rome?" "I understand. And you understand that even a shadow of suspicion can anger the gods?" She nodded. "Then perhaps you would like to tell us the truth now, to avoid their wrath?" "I have already told you the truth." Silence. Stretched like a taut string. The gray pontiff sighed, looked away. The younger one nodded slightly to the high priestess. That nod was more dangerous than any sentence. After the interrogation, everything happened quickly. Her duties were given to others. A silence promised no mercy. One morning, lictors came for her. No explanations, no farewells. Locked in a small room, under guard, allowed to eat and pray, but not to leave. The high priest began proceedings. Witnesses appeared in numbers. Slaves, assistants, even strangers, contradicting stories. No one cared. Rome wanted a scapegoat, and Cornelia was perfect. When Metellus, the high priest, came to her, she did not beg. She said she was innocent, demanded fair evidence. The verdict was short. Guilty. That meant one thing: buried alive. That evening, when the temple was quiet, for priestesses entered her room. They carried bronze lamps. The dim light cast long shadows. None looked her in the eyes. They moved slowly, like in a sacred ritual. A low bench was placed before her. The eldest gestured for her to sit. Cornelia knew what this meant. Before execution, a Vestal Virgin must be released from the goddess. Without it, no one could touch her. First, the suffibulum, the white cloak, was removed. The light fabric slipped from her shoulders. Gone. Like part of her life. Then, the infuli, woolen ribbons worn at the sacred fire, were taken. They no longer belonged to her. A gold ring was pulled from her finger. Not jewelry, but a sign of dedication, a pale mark left on her skin. Finally, her hair was unbraided, fell on her shoulders, no longer a symbol of purity, only of a mortal woman. When it was done, they left in silence. Cornelia sat motionless. Not her clothes had been taken, but her whole life. The day was set quickly. No time for appeals. She left the temple under guard. The forum pavement, still wet from night dew. She walked steadily, her face pale, but unyielding. No one touched her. No one spoke. The procession was in order. Lictors first, then priests, then the High Pontiff, and the condemned. Among the faces, she saw him, Senator Gaius Fabius, standing above the crowd. No sorrow on his face, only satisfaction. She understood. Her death was not just ritual. It ended an old dispute. Her family owned land near his. After her crime, it could pass to the state. And then, to those loyal to him. He bowed his head slightly, not in respect, but in victory. The road was short, every step a blow. At the pit, she was allowed moments to pray. A small basket of bread, a jug of water, a cruel formality. The pit was ready. Cold walls, smell of damp earth. She was lowered down. The wooden hatch closed above her. The first shovel of earth fell with a heavy sound. Each handful quieter. The world fading. The high priest spoke the ritual words. From that moment, she was dead to Rome. Later that day, the sacred fire paled for a moment, then flared again. No one spoke of it. To question the verdict was to question the gods. Her name was erased from the lists. In records, she became she who disgraced the fire. But in whispers, some remembered her, not as guilty, but as a sacrifice. For politics, her family lived in shame. Brothers lost their careers. Marriages broke. Her mother kept a small fire at home every year on this day. In secret. Months later, a new priestess took her place. But those who knew her felt it was still empty. Years passed. Rome forgot her name. But in old records, scratched by a knife, a trace remained. Cornelia. Sometimes, those the state tries to erase leave the deepest mark.